So this is going to be a weird video. First, I'm going to start off by telling you what I had for breakfast, which was a delicious plate of brown sugar Pop-Tarts. Next, I'll tell you what I'm smoking, which is Northwoods in Boswell. Love this pipe. And I'm drinking some black coffee. And now that we've got the housekeeping out of the way, let me relight here. A strange thing has happened to me. Maybe is happening. I don't know. I'm having an idea. I'm realizing that there's something here that I haven't seen before in some trains of thought. So I wanted to bring it up here, not because, well, actually I wanted to bring it up because two of the aspects of this idea come from members of the YouTube pipe community, and some of my favorite channels, Joshua in the Woods and Northwest Pipe Smoker. And it's responding to Joshua's recent video about dealing with his son and realizing that he and his son basically are the same, and dealing with a lot with similar issues, and that our love for our children is a model for how we should love our neighbor. And then something Tom, Northwest Pipe Smoker, said a long time ago. I have no idea when he said this. I would link to the video, but I don't know what it is. And he was quoting a friend of his, and he said that we are the same person at 4 years old as we are at 40 years old. Like the idea that our essential essence, our nature is the same throughout our lives, and it becomes more complex as we become adults, but basically the same. And the third aspect of this idea is a guy named Francis Dolarhyde. So I, in my youth, was a fan of Thomas Harris and his novels largely about the fictional serial killer Hannibal Lecter. I'm sure that you have all seen various screen adaptations, the best, of course, being The Silence of the Lambs with Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins, which was like only the third movie in history to sweep the Oscars in all major categories. Brilliant film, has nothing on the book. And then they made Red Dragon into a movie. Red Dragon is the prequel, which I've been reading recently, have read, finished it because I just couldn't stand to read it anymore. I was just like, I've just got to power through the rest of this book. And that movie was okay. It was good, but it was kind of like, it was more just a basic serial killer investigator movie. And, that's fun. But reading this book, of course, you're going to get much more in-depth texturing and nuance of the characters. So Francis Dolarhyde is our serial killer. He likes to creep into houses in the middle of the night and murder entire families and rape the mother after she's dead, and then install jagged pieces of shattered mirrors into the body's eye sockets and genitals. That's his thing. That's what makes him tick. And so for most of this book, you hate Francis Dolarhyde because he's a monster. Very, very clearly so. He is a Charles Manson or a Ted Bundy, and you're going through the book just praying that the guy will get hit by a bus or decide to kill himself or whatever. And actually, the investigators in the book, they consider like, well, how could we goad this guy into just committing suicide? So we don't treat him as a human being. He's a monster. He's not a human being. And then all of a sudden, there's this flashback to Francis Dolarhyde's childhood, and you see how Francis Dolarhyde became the Red Dragon. Shouldn't be a surprise. When this book was written, we were not as aware in society about how these things work, right? Now we are. It's 2017, and we all know that serial killers, of course, have no moral culpability themselves. They are influenced by their childhoods and their parents and the abuse that they suffered as kids, right? And that's why we should have sympathy for them. That is a view that I have disagreed with my entire life. These people are evil. They should be put away. I'm not a big fan of the death penalty, but whatever it takes to get these people away from me, and the rest of society. I just don't care why they do it. But when I read this flashback, and even when I read this book when I was 18, 19, 20, whatever, this was the hardest part of the book for me to read. And now I have a little boy. And in the book, Francis Dolarhyde is born with a cleft palate. His mother abandons him. Somehow he ends up with his grandmother raising him in a nursing home. And his grandmother, of course, is very abusive. And at one point he wets the bed as like a 4 or 5 year old. And he goes to her for help, and she threatens to cut off his penis with a pair of sewing shears. And she's, threatening him and saying, if you ever wet the bed again, do you want me to cut your penis off? And he's trying to say, no, Grandma. And of course he can't because of his cleft palate. And so he says, no, Anma, no, Anma. And I think it is the most heartbreaking thing I've ever read. So the whole book up to this point makes me want to buy a shotgun. Like a good pump shotgun loaded with like, federal $3 in case Francis Dolarhyde comes into my house. And then all of a sudden you turn the page, and the overriding thing you want to do is give little Francis Dolarhyde a hug. And since reading this, I have been hugging my own son. Like, he's kind of weirded out, right? He's like, why is Papa being so affectionate? What's going on? Because a friend of mine said, this is fiction, right? Yeah, I know it's fiction, except it's not fiction. Right? It's not fiction. There's Charles Manson, Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, whatever, all these serial killers. There's a serial killer maybe active in Tampa, Florida right now that's causing some issues in the news, and we have all heard stories of children being abused that I won't get into, but that's a thing that happens. In this book, I think it's easier to deal with this because it's fiction, because these aren't real people. But if you ever read about the horrors that go on in real people's lives, that this book is not making this up. And so I go back to what Tom said, that we are the same person at 4 as we are at 40, and I'm reaching 40. My kid is going to be 3, so I have some personal perspective on these ages, but it's easier for me to think about Francis Dolarhyde and think, this horrible monster that sneaks into people's houses and murders them is really just a terrified little boy who wants to be loved by his guardian, who is threatening to destroy his very identity. Does it excuse a crime? Hell no. No, not at all. And I still think, whatever, if Francis Dolarhyde or his real life equivalent presented himself to me in the street, 2 in the head and leave him to rot. Like, not a question in my mind. But that doesn't mean that I have to hate those people, that I have to hate the Ted Bundys and the Dahmers and the whatevers, the Stephen Paddocks of our time. And we see in the news that Stephen Paddock's brother has been arrested for having over 600 images of child porn on a computer. This was not the brother that did the driveway interviews, by the way. It was a different brother. But things are starting to become a little bit clearer to me anyway. I know there's a lot of debate, and we should talk about Las Vegas again, because interesting stuff there that may require some corrections on my part, because in the past I've said some things that I'm not quite sure I'm still sure about. Anyway, interesting to me that their father was clearly a bad dude. He was a bad hombre, as our president would say, and obviously all 3 sons have some issues. So going back to what Joshua was saying, my brain is going faster than I can talk. I did not understand the depth of this stuff is so hard to talk about because it makes you sound like people that you roll your eyes at. The depth of love that is possible in the human experience until I had a son. And for the first time, I was able to sort of understand why Christianity casts um, so much importance on the father-child relationship of, of the people and God, and because before I was always like, yeah, that's quaint, but that comes from a very specific time in history, a very patriarchal society, and does that really mean, we don't really know what that means. And now I'm like, oh yeah, we know what it means. Yeah, we know what it means. So, my thought after almost 3 years of this, having a son, and I responded to Joshua with this, um, is I realize how much I realize how much I haven't been loving other people my entire life. Like, I love my kids so much that I realize I have this capacity that I haven't been using. And that's a sobering realization, you know? And I particularly think of this guy that I used to pass on the street every day. He was a panhandler, um, and he had no legs, or one leg, or something like that. Anyway, he claimed to be homeless, claimed to be a lot of things. Turned out he wasn't homeless. He was just a panhandler, and that just drives me insane. And so I would always pass him and be like, yeah, no, not today, buddy. Not today, not ever. I'm not going to give you money. One time he helped me parallel park my car and I gave him $1. Um, and then we did a story on him when I was working at a paper, and it solidified that view even more. This guy is a scam artist, and I'm just, I'm not here to pass judgment on him, but I'm not going to give him any money. And he's dead now. He died a couple of years ago. Before he died, I actually had a change of heart, and I went and found him on the street. He was drunk as shit, and I gave him $25. Um, and said, man, I passed you every day, and I never gave you any money because I don't believe your story, and I don't believe that you will do. I mean, you're drunk right now. I didn't say all this to him. I'm saying all this to you now and to myself, rationalizing why I didn't give him any money. And I'm not saying I'm a fan of giving panhandlers money, but what I am realizing is that I should be a fan of basic human kindness. And in this one specific scenario, the money didn't matter. Like the fact that he was going to go buy booze with this money and drink himself to death on the public square, it didn't really matter. It didn't matter because I needed to do something for this guy, and it was the only thing I could think of to do. And now I'm trying to put all these ideas together. Like, here we have someone who I, in my heart of hearts, would have called a despicable human being, right? He has made terrible decisions in his life. He's an adult. He's responsible for those decisions. And they put him in a situation where he's basically a leech. But in this context, in the context of Francis Dolarhyde, I'm forced to kind of revisit that and say, maybe he's the same person as he was at 4 years old, and he's just trying to whatever. He's just trying to fill whatever need that, I see my kid have a need, and I immediately try to fill it. I immediately try to say, man, I know I should like ask you to stop crying, and like, let's dial this temper tantrum back. Like, the world is not going to come to an end because the bank gave you a yellow sucker instead of a green sucker. That's a thing. That's a thing. The entire depth of human emotion can be employed on the color of the sucker that they give you at the bank. But what he's really looking for is, I don't know. This idea is incomplete. The idea is incomplete. Add to this, I had a photo shoot last night at the house of I'm sure, a multimillionaire. And there were so many toys. There was a golf cart. There was, like it was, I mean, it was probably 6 or 7 thousand square feet house. And I just saw all this stuff, all this expense, all this, I'm not begrudging these people. This, I happen to know what they do for a living. They deserve it. But all those things are just yellow or green suckers. All my things are just yellow or green suckers. I'm sitting here getting ready to tie flies, and I'm like, am I going to tie a hare's ear? Am I going to tie a pheasant tail? Yellow or green sucker. What am I going to do to enjoy myself for the next hour or so until I have to go to work? You know, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. And in normal people, that's like kind of an interesting observation, right? Like, oh, I just want a sucker. But in people like this guy on the street, people like Francis Dolarhyde, it gives you more of a perspective on what's wrong with the world. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks for watching. Keep the ends out for the ties that bind.